most important food plant in the New World has been corn. It was for the American Indians and remains so for ourselves today. When and where was it first domesticated? If we knew the answers to these questions, we would go far to solving the problem of the origin of settled life in the New World. For it was only by capturing the food energy of this plant, a process which we call domestication, that man had enough food to be able to settle down, at first in villages, and then in towns, and eventually in cities. Now there are two approaches to this problem. One of these is botany, which deals with the evolution of the plant world. The other is archaeology, which deals with the remains of past human cultures. We are going to examine both of these approaches. Now, the wild ancestor of domestic corn is extinct. However, botanists have shown that here in Mexico and in Central America and in the Andean countries of South America, there are more native varieties of corn grown than in the rest of the New World put together. For this reason, botanists believe that it was here in Mexico and Central America, or in the Andean countries of South America, or in both of these two areas, that corn was first domesticated. South America can probably be excluded from this search because domestic corn does not show up there until several thousand years after it first appears in Mexico. In Mexico, on the other hand, in the dry central highlands, has been found evidence for corn that goes back 80,000 years, thousands of years before the first American Indians ever came into the New World. This is the evidence. On this slide are some grains of corn pollen. This corn pollen was found on a very deep level in Mexico City. It is estimated to be 80,000 years old. The search for the origins of corn, the search for where and when it was first domesticated, has taken us back 7,000 years into the past of Mexico, has taken us into caves and rock shelters that are so dry that the plant remains that were left by the Indians of those days are well preserved. This search has been a cooperative effort between a botanist, Dr. Paul C. Mangelsdorf, and an archaeologist, Dr. Richard MacNeish.
This is a modern corn plant growing in an experimental field. I'm sure that everyone is familiar with corn plants, but not everyone may be aware of its unique characteristics, or even know that it is a grass, a giant grass to be sure, but nevertheless a grass. Corn differs from the other cereal grasses, wheat, barley, rice, and oats, however, in several respects. In the first place, its flowers are borne on separate clusters. The male flowers, which produce the pollen, are borne in this terminal cluster, which we call a tassel. And the female flowers, which when pollinated become the kernels, are borne in this lower flower cluster, which everyone will recognize as an ear of corn. This modern ear of corn differs also from the other cereal grasses in the fact that its kernels are enclosed all together and tightly wrapped by the shucks. This means that modern corn has no way of dispersing its seeds and cannot survive in the wild. What then was the nature of the wild corn from which all cultivated corn has originated and which is now extinct? How did it survive the handicap of an ear incapable of dispersing its seeds? And if it had no ear, what did it have? The ear is the most important organ of the modern corn plant. These are questions which have been puzzling botanists for more than 4 centuries. I should now like to show you what my own studies have led me to believe. Wild corn was probably both a pod, P-O-D corn, and a pop, P-O-P corn, because both pod corn and popcorn are primitive characteristics. Here we have a plant of pod corn, and underneath this bag, which we use for controlling pollinations, we have an ear of pod corn. Pod corn is primitive in the fact that all of its kernels are enclosed individually in chaff, as they are in all wild grasses. We thought that perhaps we could produce something resembling wild corn by crossing pod corn with popcorn. Here's a plant of popcorn. Popcorn is primitive in having small, hard kernels which are capable of exploding or popping when exposed to heat. What we did was to take pollen from the male flowers of popcorn and put it on the female flowers or silks of podcorn. Now I'll show you the surprising thing that we got after several generations of breeding. We have succeeded in developing what is probably the world's most unproductive corn plant. But this plant is capable of surviving in the wild. It has two means of scattering its seeds. One is in seeds enclosed in chaff, borne in the branches of the tassel, which when ripe are easily scattered by the wind or by birds attempting to eat them. The other is in tiny ears borne in the upper joints of the stalk. In this position, they have only 2 or 3 husks which open up at maturity, allowing the ear to scatter its seeds. The real question now is whether our reconstructed wild form is anything like wild corn. Here we had to turn to the archaeologist for the answer. This is Dr. MacNeish, the archaeologist with whom I have been working for a number of years in our joint search for wild corn. Scotty, would you care to explain why you think this latest site in which you're interested in the Tehuacan Valley of Mexico is a good place to look for wild corn?
Well, Paul, I think probably we got the right area. And I show you where Tehuacan is on the map first, and then I think I can explain why I think maybe we're in the right area. Here's the Gulf of Mexico, Yucatan. There's the Rio Grande, the United States up here. And Tehuacan is right down there in southern Mexico. And of course, this is a good deal further south than where we dug before up here in Tamaulipas, up here in northeastern Mexico, where we found some corn.
That's right, but we didn't think it was wild corn. It's a little too large, and
it also wasn't quite old enough either. It was only
quite old enough, and it wasn't primitive enough.
But actually, it was still better than anything further north, and of course, it was a little like, in certain ways, like your Bat Cave and your Swallow's Nest corn from over in northwest Mexico.
It was very much like the Bat Cave corn, about the same size and about the same degree of development.
Yeah. But still, fact still remains, both of these indicated that we are too far north and that we should be looking further south. And of course, Sears' pollen down here in the Valley of Mexico, that was a very interesting fact.
That was a very important discovery. Professor Sears of Yale University found at 200 feet below the present site of Mexico City some ancient corn pollen estimated to be about 80,000 years old. And this is so much like modern corn pollen that it might almost be the same race of corn.
At that time, it had to be wild corn. And of course, it also meant that the highlands was the natural habitat of wild corn.
That's right.
Well, we then, since we hadn't found it up north, went down here to the south, looked down a little in here. We got some more corn, and it still wasn't old enough. So it looked like this was too far south, this was too far north, so somewhere in here should be the right area. Also, we could eliminate the coastal areas here because of the pond, so it had to be in the highlands in here, and Tehuacan's right smack in here. We've got a very dry area with mountains shielding it from any rain coming in. We've got caves. For the archaeologists, the Tehuacan Valley is just lovely. Well, where the work's continuing, and we're beginning to get some stuff, and we can go down and take a look at what we're doing down there and see a little archaeology, and also see a little about how we go about finding corn and our methods of archaeology. Here's the Tehuacan Valley we've been talking about. Even within this one region here, which on a big map would say, well, this is all a single desert area, there are actually little sub-areas in different parts of the valley. Well, some of the areas down in the center of the valley, if it dries up enough in there, why, you'll get some of the sand dune kind of desert in there. And now we're moved out of the center onto the edge. You're beginning to see the real desert vegetation, which is very different from the center valley vegetation, with a lot more cactus, a lot more mesquite trees. In fact, everything you see over there to the left now has a big thorn on it, a big sticker on it. This region, though it looks nice and fertile now, this is all due to man's handiwork, putting in irrigation ditches and giving the whole valley artificial water. But a desert's a very rough place for a primitive man because there's not much food. And these again were one of the reasons these earlier people were sort of nomadic, because each one of these little separate desert worlds has its own set of animals, its own set of plants. The nuts and berries in these plants become edible at different times of the year, so you live in one little kind of desert, one little desert world for one season, and then move to the next, and move to it the next, and then the next year come back to the one you started in. Now, one of the places they seem to have camped during their seasonal rounds was in caves. And caves are really nice for us, for the simple reason that they're the driest part of a dry desert area. And anything these early people dropped in them was preserved. Corn cobs, blankets, old foodstuffs, everything. Now, most caves, of course, appear in cliffs, down at the bottom of the cliffs. So in our initial survey, our initial looking around, we checked a lot of these cliffs. We walked them out, looking for the right kind of cave. The whole place is just honeycombed with little caves, and there's one right in through here, which is a perfectly good place. I mean, and not only that, the roof of it is all blackened from fires being in it. So we know somebody lived there. And even right here, you see, we're right at the cave. We finally got right to it. But there's stuff all over the ground here. Here we've got a piece of a bark beater. As they lived in the cave and they threw garbage around, why, some of it kicked down out of the front of the cave. Yeah, here's a spear point. And this again proves that it was a good hunting area. And again, you get a pretty good idea from out in the front of the stuff poured out of the total time period. Nice and cool inside. Nice place to stay out of the rain. At high noon, it's much more comfortable here than out in the sun. And you got a good view out down the valley. And, you know, during the little rainy season we have, you'd still be out of the rain. And if it gets cold, you build a fire in the front of the cave and you warm up the whole thing. There's quite a bit of stuff on the surface and some corn cobs. Nothing we found here is early. Is back when corn should have started. So there's no point in going any further, because we've got lots of better caves down the valley which had even early stuff on their surfaces. Here's Kwang-On Cave, where we've been digging for quite a while.
Your group stick them on this end and put the rest of the boys back where they were yesterday. See?
One feature about Kwang-On Cave is only livable during the wet season. In other words, you get nuts and berries from these various kinds of trees only during a few months of the year. This, of course, meant that people came back into this cave during this wet season year after year, over thousands of years, and left a little garbage from that wet season, one layer on top of the next.
Might as well set up the instrument, and then we'll measure out from the corner a set of stakes. Put a set of stakes in.
Now, our digging is done as scientifically as possible. A good archaeologist ought to be able to put everything he digs up back in the ground exactly where it came from. Now, one of the ways we keep these careful records is we initially stake out the cave in little 1 meter squares. We use a tape measure and stakes, and each one of these squares is given a number. Anything we find is recorded in terms of the number of the square. Now, beside this, we're forever making maps. We map both things up and down, and also on a horizontal, flat, level plane. And again, every artifact is recorded on our maps. And of course, making maps, we use surveying implements. If we don't have these sort of records, why, we're never going to tell exactly what kind of artifacts the first group had, where they were, and keep them separate from what the second group used, and the third group, and so forth. In Kwang-On here, why, there's a lot of rock which has fallen down from the roof of the cave, so we're occasionally forced to use these little picks, and we peck away at the dirt just as carefully as we can, so we won't break anything. Most of the time, however, it's a good deal better to use a little trowel and just scrape off the dirt little by little. This way, we don't miss anything, and if we do hit anything, we don't break it, and usually don't move it, so we can record exactly where it came from. Just in case we might have missed something, we put even all the loose dirt we've dug up in a bucket. Take the bucket out of the pit, dump it through a screen, and get anything we might have missed. Actually, we use them by the time we're finished digging a cave. Why, anything anybody left in it, we found.